How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're gonna give an updated Atlantic hurricane season forecast for 2022 and see if any various factors could make this hurricane season potentially more active than initially anticipated. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin. Let's take a look at the ENSO outlook, and now it's pretty certain at this point that La Nina will develop for the main part of the hurricane season, which includes August, September, and even into October. And right now, we are currently in a La Nina, and that's expected to continue maybe until the winter months, well after the hurricane season ends. So I'd say it's pretty much most likely at this point we will experience La Nina type conditions for this hurricane season, which definitely isn't good news because that does enhance the risk of a more active than usual hurricane season where a neutral phase isn't likely at this point or as likely as before. So I think more likely than not, a La Nina phase will develop for the main portion of the hurricane season. Now, taking a look at what typically happens during a La Nina. Of course, since the sea surf temperatures along the equatorial Pacific are cooler than average, air is more stable, there's more dry air, so there's fewer hurricanes in the eastern Pacific, but more hurricanes in the Atlantic as a result of less vertical wind shear and less atmospheric stability, because all that stability is happening right around the equatorial Pacific rather than the Atlantic. And of course, the air aloft is trying to move to the area where the air is sinking, which is in the equatorial Pacific, and to do that it needs to move that the air in the upper levels needs to move from the east and that pretty much goes the same direction as surface winds, which creates a very lightly sheared environment along with a lot less stability, which certainly does encourage more tropical cyclone development. And that's definitely a major concern because also we're under one of the most strong La Ninas we experienced one of the most strong La Ninas ever for spring, and that's expected to continue for the hurricane season, which is definitely a major concern, and that will most likely lead to a more active than usual hurricane season. Now, another thing I want to point out is that it's very important to take a look at analog years when it comes to forecasting the current hurricane season, because it gives a good idea of sort of how active or the general tropical activity you should expect for a given hurricane season. And what an analog year typically is a year that has a, let's say, a pattern that's very similar to what's happening right now. And the 2 years that stand out the most for me are the 2001 hurricane season as well as the 2012 hurricane season, where we just came off a strong La Nina to now a weaker La Nina this year. So as a result, we should expect a hurricane season that's fairly similar to 2001 and 2012 hurricane season. Of course, not necessarily in terms of track, and the total amount of storms is probably gonna be different than what you experienced to 2000 compared to 2001 and 2012 hurricane season. But it should be at least around the ballpark in terms of how much tropical activity we should experience. And of course, during the 2001 and 2012 hurricane seasons, they were one of the most active hurricane seasons in history, especially the 2012 hurricane season, where we almost needed to enter Greek alphabet territory with how many named storms we had in the 2012 hurricane season. And of course, it had some big names such as Hurricane Sandy, which just pounded the Northeast. So based on the fact that those years that are very similar to this year were more active than usual, then it's safe to say that this year as well will experience a hurricane season that's more active than usual. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start getting a rapid change when it comes to the amount of tropical activity from what we're experiencing right now once we enter August. Now, another thing I want to show you guys is the Atlantic multidectal oscillation, because of course that plays another big role, because depending on whether or not an Atlantic multidectal oscillation is positive or negative, it could determine the sea surf temperatures anomaly within a given area. So it's pretty much, so the multi-decadal oscillation pretty much occurs in between an estimated period of, let's say, 60 years, where the sea surf temperatures become cooler and or warmer than average over a prolonged period of time, as shown by this graph, because we haven't experienced a negative Atlantic multidecadal oscillation since right around the mid 90s, and you see that we're pretty much 27 years and going since we last experienced a negative Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. So it's a given that compared to long-term average, C-surf temperatures will be a lot warmer than average, which will promote more lift in the atmosphere and less sinking air as a result of a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation compared to the long-term average. So this will contribute to a more active than usual hurricane season that we're in a positive phase. So sea-surf temperatures will be warmer than average compared to a long-term average over, let's say, 100 years. So, of course, a lot of you guys probably haven't really experienced the negative Atlantic multidecadal oscillation in your life, including me. That the last time that Atlantic multidecadal oscillation happened was well before I was born. So it might not feel like it might be more active, but there are other factors we need to take a look at that will show that even compared to a short-term average, this hurricane season will be more active than usual. Taking a look at the current sea-surf temperature anomaly. So there is some slightly good news, is that the main developed regions, when it comes to sea-surf temperatures, did not warm up as anticipated, and to where the sea-surf temperatures were considered above average. Right now, for the most part, actually, the main developed region is experiencing sea-surf temperatures cooler than average. Now, that's certainly great news, and that could promote a little bit more stability and less and a little bit more dry air right around the main developed region to suppress tropical cyclone activity. But if we were to look further westward, we still see the Caribbean, we still see the Gulf of Mexico, and we still see a lot of the Northern Atlantic experience sea-surf temperatures much warmer than average. And while we do have some pockets here and there of cooler than average sea-surf temperatures, the temperature changes a lot. Sea-surf temperatures changes a lot more when you're closer to a coast, where the air temperature is definitely a lot more variable, especially when you're further northward, when you experience some variations when it comes to jet stream dips compared to the closer to the equatorial Atlantic. So the good news is that sea-surf temperatures are cooler than average for the main developed region. Hopefully that stays that way. Currently, it is expected that at most likely we will experience sea-surf temperatures at least hovering around average for the main portion of the hurricane season, which is definitely better than warmer than average sea-surf temperatures. But then again, we are still in a La Nina, and other forecasts that the CFS models, that the climatology models are stating right now, is that the other factors will completely go pretty much against a less favorable environment for hurricane for the main developed region. So we will see less wind shear most likely, and a little bit more moisture than average. So that could completely offset the fact that sea-surf temperatures are cooler than average in the main developed region. But we just need to wait and see. Now, taking a look at what the CFS model is forecasting, like I said, you see the CFS model isn't expecting the main developed region to really warm up much, even headed into October, as at most it likely will stay around average, maybe slightly above average, which is certainly good news and better than the more dire, warmer than average sea-surf temperatures I initially anticipated. But you still see most of the Atlantic is experiencing warmer than average sea-surf temperatures. So overall, even though the main developed region is a little bit cooler, you still should expect a more active than usual hurricane season, especially with a La Nina that's expected to build even stronger by the time the main part of the hurricane season comes, which I'm talking about August, September, and even into October. So that's only something to keep in mind. And another thing that's another pretty big concern is the wind shear forecast, because we do see that most of the Atlantic is under the shades of purple, which represents lower than average upper level winds, which does induce a little bit more of a favorable environment right around the main developed region. The only areas where we're experiencing stronger than usual wind shear are pretty much the southeast states, states. So that definitely could be good news because that could maybe weaken storms or maybe steer it out to sea before it reaches land along the East Coast or along the Gulf Coast, which certainly could suppress tropical cyclone activity if the wind shear does remain a little bit, if it does remain strong enough along the southeast. But still, we do see most of the Atlantic experiencing less wind shear than usual. So overall, this should be a more active than usual hurricane season. And in terms of the moisture anomaly, we do see a little bit more moisture right around the Gulf of Mexico and head a little bit further northward. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the sea surf temperatures are much warmer than average further westward you go in the northern Atlantic, which will allow for more lift and more thunderstorm activity to occur right around the southeast and Gulf of Mexico for more tropical cyclones to develop. So I think the most active area when it comes to tropical cyclone development will be further westward, closer to the Gulf Coast and Caribbean, and we could see potentially more storms head a little bit further northward as a result of the sea surf temperatures being warmer than average, which will allow more troughs to build right around the northeast for storms to move northward, move more northward than typical. So that's something to keep in mind. That I think that the most active portion, the most active area when it comes to hurricanes this year will be the Western Atlantic. So keep that in mind for this hurricane season. Now, taking a look at the MJO filtered forecast, what I want to show you guys this because it does concern me, because while we are in a positive MJO pattern right now, which suppresses tropical cyclone activity by creating a more stable environment overall, we do see that by week 2, which is entering the beginning of August, we're going to enter a negative MJO pattern, as that timing is just going to be very bad because the negative MJO pattern will come straight right on time when the hurricane season really begins to get active. So we could see a very active August as a result of this, as a result of how much lift in the atmosphere a negative MJO pattern will induced in the northern Atlantic. So as a result of this as well, I do think more tropical cyclones should be expected this hurricane season, since the negative MJO pattern will build, but it's the worst of the hurricane season, which is definitely a major concern. Now, taking a look at my current forecast when it comes to the amount of storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes you should expect. So compared to the recent average between 1991 and 2020, where we typically receive 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, I'm expecting quite a bit more storms to develop, right around 21, which is approximately 50% more storms than the average. And then I'm expecting 11 hurricanes and 6 major hurricanes, which is pretty much double what you typically experience on an average hurricane season between 1991 and 2020. So I do expect that this hurricane season will be borderline hyperactive, if not hyperactive in general. So that's something to be prepared for if you're along the if you're along any coast along the northern Atlantic. So keep that in mind. But remember, whether this hurricane season exceeds or falls below your expectations, just remember all it takes is one hurricane to completely devastate your community. So don't underestimate a hurricane season just because it didn't necessarily reach your expectations when it comes to the amount of storms, because remember, all it takes is one storm. Now, here's my hurricane season outlook in general for the northern Atlantic. This is where I'm expecting most of the storms to develop this hurricane season. Most tropical cyclones right around the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and headed a little bit further northward up the Gulf Stream, as I do believe the warmer than average sea surf temperatures, as well as the fact that the CFS model is expecting more moist than average conditions, will allow for a higher possibility of tropical cyclones to develop right around the Western Atlantic. So that's something to keep in mind. In the oranges, I'm expecting an above Still an above average hurricane season. The lighter than average wind shear along with the La Nina will help produce a little bit more hurricanes than what you typically experience. And in the yellow is where you should expect less hurricanes, as either you're a little bit too far south to receive that many tropical cyclones or hurricanes to develop, and or maybe the wind shear is a little bit stronger due to a variety of factors. But I'm expecting the western Atlantic to receive hyperactive hurricane formations or tropical cyclone formations in general. And for the entire Atlantic, I'm expecting a more active than usual hurricane season, borderline hyperactive. So make sure to prepare for that. But anyways, guys, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more about the content, and I hope you guys all have a great day.